Welcome to another deeply resonant episode of Sacred Harmony, where we explore the mysterious spaces where soul, sound, and spirit meet. Today, we are joined by Wanda Thibodeaux, composer, writer, thinker, and a guiding voice at the crossroad of faith and artistry. With a rich background as a double music major and a writer featured everywhere from Harvard Business Review to her own beloved Faithful on the Clock platform. Wanda brings a rare blend of technical knowledge and spiritual sensitivity. Together, we dive into how music can become trauma regulating spiritual practice, why certain sounds reach the spirit beyond cognition, and what modern music often gets wrong about the true spiritual impact. Welcome to the show, Wanda. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Mhm. So, from your perspective, as both a musician and a spiritual thinker, what makes music uniquely capable of regulating trauma in ways wonder words alone often can't?
Well, I think there's a couple layers to that. The first thing, if you look at it just purely from the biological standpoint, there are lots of studies now that show that music can be very regulating from, like a brainwave standpoint. The brain does kind of want to jive with the rhythms and the pitches and the frequencies that are in music. So we know that we can actually use music to kind of regulate the nervous system. This has kind of come out, especially in the last decade or so of research. But just from the spiritual standpoint, I think that because music has that capacity kind of prime our bodies to get into different states of, whether it's excitement or sadness or whatever it might be, that kind of opens the door to a state of spirituality. So if I'm feeling like I really want to be calm and meditative and connect to God or, whatever higher power you connect to, I can use music tracks for that. And it just kind of opens the door to thinking about the spirituality in a very different way than if those music tracks were not available to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And do you think this power lies more in the structure of the music or in the listener's internal readiness to receive it?
I think it's both. Definitely, like I said, with the biology, there are things that we can recognize that moves on people almost in a universal way. We do have neurodivergence, so it's not completely that it applies to everyone. Um, but I do think that your experiences will help you interpret what you are hearing in the sound. So, for example, like well, when I was very young, I was about 16, I was basically in my bedroom and I was trying to write my first novel, very badly, but I was trying to do that. But in the background, I was playing Brahms and Beethoven just like on repeat. And so now that kind of every time I hear those pieces, that I kind of have that memory of those of that experience, which was very good for me. I loved that experience. So, when I hear that music now, all of those memory recalls and that experience that I had are tied to that. So, if we connect that to spirituality, whether it's a good experience that you had or maybe even a negative one, we are going to draw that and the recall that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that distinction could also help listeners understand why some songs move them profoundly while others barely graze the surface.
Well, I think again, a lot of it is in our experiences, how we are perceiving the music. If it's new to us, maybe we will be maybe even a little apprehensive. Our minds are trying to like figure it out a little bit more, so we're kind of in a different mode. But I think sometimes the way that the music composed does make a difference. So, for example, most popular music, at least in the United States, it does follow a very, very predictable structure, and our minds kind of recognize that. So if we are looking to get into a certain state, we are going to look at that structure of that music and say, "Is it what I expect?" And there's less for the brain to do when it's predictable, like it's a pattern that we've seen. It's like, "Oh, I know that," and like we just kind of get into that groove. If it's something that we don't know, we have to kind of do a little bit more work under the surface to kind of figure out what the music is doing, and that can influence what the experience really is.
Yes, 100%. And also, you have said that music bypasses cognition and connects directly with the spirit. How have you experienced or witnessed this phenomenon in real life?
Sure. I've had experienced this a lot, actually. I tend to listen to a lot of choir music just because of my background, and I know that's not for everybody, but I have had a couple of experiences where, I'm listening to this piece and it got to certain moments in the piece, and I kind of just felt like almost like this release of tension, and I think other people have experienced that as well. But it was just kind of like this flooding of, like, not ecstasy, but just, like, kind of like a mandala had just opened up in front of me and just kind of, like, being overwhelmed, right? If you look from the Christian tradition, there's the story that God passes in front of Moses, and you don't really see his face, but you see his power, and that's kind of what it felt like, just because of the sound and the way that that was, like, messing with my brain. So that was a very, very powerful experience, and that was really the only way that I could describe it, is just like this sense of overwhelming power, and I don't know where that came from, but from the spiritual standpoint, I definitely had the sense that there was something bigger than I was. So that's just kind of one example that I could give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's amazing. Is there a moment from your own journey where music reached you in a way nothing else could?
Oh, yeah. I know, because of my background, I had kind of a rough childhood growing up. But the music was the one thing that I could continuously come back to. It was the source of beauty that I had in my life. And as long as that was there and I could pull on that, I felt okay. Well, maybe not okay, but okay enough because I could always trust that to be there. And as long as that beauty was there, then the rest of the world wasn't so ugly. Right. And so I really looked to the music to kind of get me through things, and that really kind of became a grounding force behind everything that I did, and because I was able to connect to that beauty, then I started, kind of looking in other spiritual ways for like, "Well, okay, well, where does this beauty come from?" So again, it, like, opened the door to some of those questions that I was having. I'm like, "How can I get more of it?" Those kinds of questions that I think a lot of us have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. And also, those personal moments often make the science and spirituality feel tangible and relatable for listeners.
I just wanna emphasize that the experiences that different people have, it's not universal per se. It's just that from the scientific standpoint, we do know a little bit about how the brain works. So we know some tendencies, but if your experience with a certain track is different, like I said, you are pulling on your own experience, your own biology. So somebody might listen to the tracks that I used to listen to and say, "Meh, that wasn't so great," so I don't want people to think that, "Oh, because I'm listening to this track and I don't feel anything or I don't have that experience, I'm doing something wrong." That's not the case at all. It's just you have to find the pieces that work for you to get what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, many people today feel that modern music lacks genuine spiritual resonance. From a technical standpoint, what elements are missing that once helped music evoke deeper states?
Sure. So now, like I said, especially at least with the pop music here in the United States, we do kind of um, follow a formula to what we write, and that's noted. You can look up articles on that, and we actually know that the amount of difference in the tracks has actually gone down over the last couple decades. Like, that is a measurable thing that we can look at, and so from that standpoint, I guess you could say they are being less creative because they're using fewer techniques than they used to, like things that the unexpected things, we don't see as many of those now, and they're sticking more with more predictable patterns. So that creativity kind of has gone down. But I really think that when you're looking from a technical standpoint, the thing that makes the difference is the brain likes novelty to a certain degree. And when you have so much predictability, that can be a good thing sometimes. Like if you're just trying to mellow out and you have a track that's just like kind of trance like, that can be useful. But from other standpoints, there are techniques that kind of play on the way that our brain wants to resolve things. Certain chord progressions, if they don't resolve the way that you expect them to, or maybe if a tempo changes, that perks our brain up. So if we are finding tracks that have those interests, and we have these tracks that have these big climactic moments, our brain likes those climax moments. And so if we have a track that is building in a good way to that moment, we're going to feel it. But if you have a track that's just kind of the same or uses the same techniques, which is kind of what we're getting now, you kind of lose that. And I think part of it too, there are, I mean, a lot of musicians out there now, are formally studied, but we don't use a lot of the techniques that are. Let me put it this way. A lot of the techniques that we are using now are using there's a big emphasis on computers and technology and how can we use the AI to make this better and using that to generate things. But if you're thinking that way, you are not thinking in an emotional arc. Composers back in the day, like Beethoven and Brahms, like they were thinking about how do I build the tension? How do I tell a story? And so now you might be able to build a track with AI in, 5 seconds or less with a prompt, but it's not gonna generate the same feeling for the listener because you weren't composing in a way that intentionally played on the emotion that the people have. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And also, are these missing elements a symptom of cultural shifts or are they choices made by industry based on trends and commercial appeal?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think certainly when you have pressure from an industry, you're going to kind of want to see if you can play with those. You're going to connect that to your ability to survive in that industry. And we certainly see that in music a lot. Um, but that's where creators have to say, I'm going to have my own voice. And even though everybody else is doing it this way, I'm going to find my own brand, my own voice, my own rhythm, and that is where really, in a way, you can set yourself apart and do better, in my opinion. Because if you follow what else is doing, it might be momentarily popular, but the danger of following a trend in creativity, any kind of creativity, whether it's music or anything else, is that the trend eventually will fade. So it's better to just say, "I'm gonna stand out in my own way, and that's gonna be my evergreen way of standing out." That can stand out forever. It's not a trend, it's just there. People can take it or leave it generations from now. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. And also, this conversation invites listeners to reflect on what they consume sonically and how it shapes the inner world, often without realizing it. So, as someone who blends faith, creativity, and emotional understanding, how do you see music functioning as a bridge between human vulnerability and divine connection?
Okay. So, again, like, if when I talk about that experience that I had in my room, I don't know if I would have felt as good about what I was doing before, and that kind of gave me a sense of purpose with what I was doing, and it magnified the sense of I don't wanna say goodness, but, like, it made the experience of writing better, and it really kind of made me feel like I was just connected to something bigger, and that emotional imprint that had on me, that there was something literally playing in the background that was generating that emotion more than if I would have just been writing in silence. So that emotion that I had, like, afterward, I was just like, "That was, like, the best experience that well, one of the best experiences that I've ever had in my life." And that made me want so much more of that music. The writing too, but definitely more of the music because it made me kind of feel that higher power, my God, way more than if I would have just been alone. I don't know if that really answers your question, but
No, it does. And do you think this bridge is something people can consciously build, or is it something that emerges organically through practice?
again, I think it's both. If you go in listening to tracks to say, this is my purpose, like I want to connect with something, I think you're going to hear music a little bit differently that way. But I also know, again, from my experience, some of the most powerful experiences I have ever had with music have been ones that I did not expect and caught me completely off guard. I have been in tears before, like just a puddle on the floor because I didn't expect it to move me the way that it did, and all of a sudden, the music just kind of, like, brought all of these things out of me that I didn't really even know that I would needed to feel or deal with. So, that kind of became a gateway to kind of just let things release, and I needed that too. So, I think either way is completely valid. If you go in with intentionality, you can get good things from that. If you study music and say, "What can I learn from this?" I've many times as a music major, I've gone to certain pieces on purpose to say, "Why in the world did I react that way at the climax of that point? What is actually structurally going on there that happened?" Um, so that's happened to me a couple times where I've looked deeper into the music to understand it, but you don't necessarily have to have a music background to do that. You just have to be open to it and say, I'm gonna intentionally just try it, just see what happens, see what I feel, and just go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that exploration could also help listeners recognize that spiritual connection through music is both accessible and deeply personal.
Mhm. Absolutely. And
Yes.
I do wanna emphasize too, like, I come at this from the Christian perspective. A lot of the experiences that I have had have been with Christian music. I do a lot of, uh, like, if you sing anything like Bach and stuff like that, there's a lot of religious music in the choral tradition in that. But I will say any religion is going to have their own sacred music. They're going to have their own traditions. So I don't want to say that, oh, one type of music is any better or you have to follow a certain religion to get this experience. You don't. It's just like there is good music in a lot of different places. And I will say some of the best spiritual experiences I have had have come from secular tracks. Like I'm a big film music person and I've had some of the same kind of experiences with that music as I have with my sacred music. So, again, it's really just about being open. You don't have to necessarily follow any particular religion to get that spiritual experience with music. You just have to be open and listen.
Yes, totally. And for someone dealing with unresolved pain or anxiety, what simple musical practice could they begin today to support emotional regulation and spiritual grounding?
So, we know that there's a lot of research on this now, again, like I mentioned at the top of the show, in terms of how music actually, I don't wanna say messes with the brain and how it interacts with, like, our nervous system. So, what I can recommend is try a couple different tracks, recognizing that each of those tracks is gonna have its own tempo, it's gonna have its own even certain particular sounds people will react to, whether it's like, maybe you have this instrument versus another, and you'll like one better than the other. So, that exploration and just be start with one track, doesn't matter what it is, and just say, "I'm gonna listen, and I'm just gonna try and be very aware and grounded in my body and just see what happens." Maybe you feel like the tension in your neck start to relax. Or maybe all of a sudden you feel like you can breathe better. But all of these tracks are going to make you respond in a certain way. And it's about the awareness of what that track is doing to you. Because if you really, from a conscious standpoint, keep track of that, then you can say, okay, I need to regulate, like I'm really wound up. I need to calm down. And you know from experience, you tried this track and you felt really calm with that track. You'd say, "I'm gonna pull that one out because I need to calm down." But I will say there's something called the IPO principle, and that basically means whatever nervous system state you are in, you basically have to, gradually work your way out of that state. So if you're in a very, very, agitated state, maybe you start with music that's a little bit more agitated, that matches that. And then the next track you listen to is gonna be a little calmer, and then the next track, a little calmer. So it's not necessarily like you slam on the brakes, okay? Whether you're wanting to, get up or down in the mood. You have to kind of make the playlist, so to speak, to kind of gradually work that down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And also, why do you think this small practice is often overlooked despite its transformative potential?
Well, I think sometimes I know sometimes when people have a lot of pain or they are stressed out or whatever it is, they are looking for kind of big results, big experiences. And it's almost like we have kind of gotten to the point where we don't know how to pay attention to the smaller things. So the smaller experiences, the smaller nuances that we might experience with music, it's harder to notice those. Like, again, we have to be intentional with those. So, smaller practices that we have, whether it's I'm going to play my instrument for 5 minutes, or I'm going to listen to just this particular track, or maybe I'm going to go meet with somebody and we're going to talk about music. All of those things, those small little things that you can implement through the day, it's very hard to get into a practice with those and get into a rhythm and see them as valuable because we don't always recognize how they're adding up. So I would just encourage listeners to make a practice of it, whether it's like, again, 5 minutes, maybe you are just playing on the piano for 5 minutes, whatever it is, but you do it consistently. And you kind of look at what is my experience over time with that, and don't give up on it right away. I like to say that you need something at least, a couple weeks before you can really make an assessment of whether it's helping. And of course, we're so busy all the time. It's hard to keep good habits with small practices. We kind of let them go to the wayside sometimes. But again, it's just that small, consistent practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and practical guidance like this gives listeners not just insight but an immediate doorway to healing.
Mhm.
So, Wanda, thank you for guiding us through the profound inner working of music as both a balm and a bridge. Your wisdom reminds us that sound isn't merely entertainment, it's a vessel, a teacher, and sometimes a sanctuary. And to everyone listening, let this conversation encourage you to listen differently, to engage with music as a companion in your healing, and to explore the deeper spiritual current beneath every note. Your inner harmony begins with the sounds you choose to let into your soul.